kids back in the olden days, as my boys used to say, um, used to learn very naturally through mentors, models,
Mm.
and the great books, and they can still do that.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. I am back today with Janice Campbell, and we are talking about ways to teach our kids and how to help our kids to learn. Janice is part of our Meet the Cast lineup. We're so thrilled that she is part of the Schoolhouse Rocked movie. And Janice, you got to see the movie, right?
Absolutely, and I love it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's fun. It's so much fun actually sending out the movie to the people who are in it and kind of waiting to see what their response is going to be like, oh, it was okay. And some people are like, it was great, but I looked horrible, or it was great, but why did I wear that outfit? Or, it's just so funny to see how people, and that was me. I mean, I still look at that movie. I'm like, why did I cut my hair short right before we filmed? And why did I wear that outfit that I wore? But anyway, it's exciting. We are very happy and honored to have you as part of the film. So thank you for being part of it. As we are talking about ways to teach our kids, I mentioned in the first episode that this is something that I won't say I struggle with it, but it's something that I feel like I'm always learning. I'm always trying to figure out, like, how do I best teach my kids? And it changes every year. We just, at the end of the last episode, we were talking about how, when our kids are little, it's easier to teach them in small chunks. And as they get older, it's easier to teach them in big chunks. And as our kids grow, I think we grow as well. And our teaching style changes and transforms a little bit along with our kids. And so it's kind of always, it's never this like, I've arrived and I've learned how to teach perfectly grades K through 12, right? It's a process.
You're learning on the job. That's the whole
Right.
it's like with parenting. We learn on the job with parenting, and we learn on the job with homeschooling, but it thank goodness, it evolves gradually. So
Yes.
you don't usually have these huge jumps, and you don't
Right.
have to make artificial jumps like waiting for the next school year and then doing something really different. You can just continue and make gradual tweaks, and those gradual tweaks will continue to fit, and that's good. Because,
Yeah.
like, the first thing we started with was mentioning that kids back in the olden days, as my boys used to say, um, used to learn very naturally through mentors, models,
Mm.
and the great books, and they can still do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's our job not to necessarily be the best teachers, but to cultivate those great students.
Yeah. And you have, if I remember correctly, you have a list of some of the great books on your website. Like if we're going to, go to the library or, a bookstore online and find, the top 10 greatest books we can read with it or to our kids. You have a list of some of the great books that we could and should be reading to them, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So
Is
I
that on
have
your
that
everyday education
I
page?
have one list, I have 2 lists on my Excellence in Literature website.
Okay.
Um, one is a list of reading books for boys that
Uh-huh.
are great, and another is a list of historical fiction, kind of arranged historical fiction, I think in biographies, arranged chronologically, which is
Okay.
a really long list.
Yeah.
But then I also have for my Excellence in Literature 5 years worth of classic literature that I think everybody should read.
Yes, okay, good to know, and you it's funny that you have books to read with boys because you have only boys, you have no girls.
Right. Exactly, and I grew up by myself with my with my grandparents, no brothers, no sisters, and
Uh-huh.
I kind of always assumed I'd have girls because I had all these girl books
Yeah,
from when I was young, and I saved all the books,
yeah,
and happily, some of them were the kind of thing used in Charlotte Mason curriculum, so they were
right.
still read, and even, the boys even read some girl books, but I
Sure,
sure found so many others while they were growing up because boys, sometimes some of them will take a little bit longer to start reading. Some of them will
sure.
want to read things with a little more adventure and, action and humor than girls seem to care about sometimes, and so books that appeal to boys are usually quite fun.
Yes, yeah. It's funny, the other day, Garrett walked into, our room where we have our bookcases, and he looked on top of the shelf, he said, "Do we have 2 sets of Little House on the Prairie?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" And he goes, "Oh, I know why." He said, "Because you want one for each girl." And I said, "Yes." I said, "I had one set and then someone offered me another set for free." And so I took it because my thought was, well, now I have one to send off with each of my girls. Because
Right.
I've said this lots of times on the podcast. If I were stranded on a deserted island and I could only take 3 books with me, it would be the Bible, the Little House on the Prairie series, because I consider that one book,
Right.
and The Hiding Place. Like, those are my 3 top book choices. And so it just made sense to me that I would have 2 because, how would I choose which girl to give it to? So now they each have their
Right.
own set of Little House on the Prairie. It's the only book, you know, or book set that I have 2 of. Every other one I only have 1 of, but that one I
Right.
just thought, "Oh, what a blessing and what a joy that I get to give one to each of them." So anyway, let's continue on. We were talking about some ways to teach, some
Okay.
effective ways to teach. So we talked about reading with focus, and keeping our lessons short. And then we talked about choose one idea to ponder daily, and then summarize that idea. Where do you go after that?
So summarizing can take place on paper or mentally or verbally or
Mhm.
whatever. So as you summarize, the fourth thing is think about the connections that you see in the things that you're summarizing. So think about not just the work that you're reading now, the book you're reading now, but think about how does this historical event, how does this person, how does this story connect with other things I've read, other things we've studied.
Okay.
And again, it's encouraging the student to use their mind to think back to what they already know. When
Yeah.
you make those little connections, learning becomes stickier, stickier, stickier. They can, you hook it to perhaps a really interesting field trip you took or a unit study or even just a conversation
Yeah.
or another book, and you remember more things. And so that's number 4, think about the connections.
I could see how even with little kids, I mean, you could start that with them itty bitty, where, if you're teaching numbers and colors, maybe you're doing
Mhm.
flashcards and teaching, 3 as the number and yellow as the color. And then you go to the grocery store and you see 3 yellow bananas. You can make that
Right.
correlation with them, look, there's 1, 2, 3 bananas and they're yellow. And so as you start that young and just move that along through their years, that makes a lot of sense because it really does help them to connect all of life and all of God's creation together and how life all works together.
Absolutely. I we had an example of that riding back from the beach with my daughter, couple 2 of my daughters-in-law and the 2-year-old grandson, and we kept went through a tunnel, and there would be a sign that said 55, and he would say, "5," and then we would see another sign in yellow, and he would say, "Yellow,"
Oh,
and
yeah.
his engagement with his world
Mhm.
had been cultivated by making connections, and so those 5s, those yellow signs, they all fit with he has little, blocks that have those colors and numbers.
Right.
All those
Right.
connections start very, very young
Yep. Yep.
and
That's
build.
exciting. Okay. All right. So think about connections. What would be the next thing?
So, number 5, discuss what you're learning. Discuss it with someone. And sometimes homeschoolers they don't have anyone. They're an only child, and that's fine. So what you do is you work with your learning journal. And I so encourage families to keep learning journals with drawings and maps and timelines and all of the things that you would normally notebook. Keep it in a big sketchbook and finish your year with a learning journal that has examples of all the things you've learned, and you flip through it at the end of the year, you've got an overview of learning. It's a delightful, delightful thing to do.
So do you explain this learning journal to me? Because this is not something that I've ever done. I mean, you just gave us a brief explanation of it, but do you put all of your subjects in it or do you just learn some of the things? Talk about this. Let's park here for a bit.
Okay, yes, learning journals, absolutely the most fun thing ever, at least if you like to write or draw or do anything like that.
Sure.
So yes, you put all the subjects in it and you just each subject goes on a new page. And the student chooses what to write or draw from the current lesson. So if it's a history something from history, they might draw a timeline of events and maybe say if they are particularly interested in the types of armor they were wearing at that particular time, they could draw that and write a little bit about it. An older student might be doing lab reports, or writing down scientific information discoveries. You can also put in commonplace quotes, like if you want to remember quotes from things you read, you can put in quotes and maybe a little bit about the book. Just an entire compendium of what you're learning through the year. It's
Okay.
fascinating to page through these things. I've got some pictures of some that, teens have done, not my teens, but other
Yeah.
teens, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I've actually not heard of doing a learning journal before, but that sounds like a lot of fun. I have one daughter who is just a great artist. She loves to draw. She's always drawing. So funny. As a matter of fact, today I was looking at one of her books, and there's a photo of someone, and that photo of that someone now has a hat and glasses and hair and all the things. I'm like, she can't just leave the photo alone. She has to
Right.
create something around the photo. It's so funny to me.
Yeah.
So
But
yeah,
that
that's
drawing of all of that helps them remember. If you write it, if you draw it, you're going to remember it, especially when
yeah,
you're arranging it on a page in a way that pleases your eye
right.
and helps you remember.
Yeah,
Because
that is.
typography, making the
Yep.
important words bigger, doing your best to do careful work, it can be a delight. But the whole thing with a learning journal, it's a process and not a product. You
Right.
can't get stuck with the perfectionist thing. You
Right.
want to create beauty or you want to create just memories.
Sure.
And some kids are not going to have patience and be really great at making it look good,
Right.
but the process will help them learn.
Right. Right. That is a great idea. Let's take a quick break.
Continue doing what you're doing. Don't give up, because I do believe that homeschool moms are America's greatest heroes.
We are back with Janice. Okay, so we talked about learning journals. What's next?
Okay, number 6 is seek wisdom and understanding.
Mm,
And the original writer of these rules for study he was a college professor, he was a Christian, and he said, "Pray
mhm.
about what you're learning." And what does it all mean? How does it connect? And for small children, of course, that can be just a very simple thing. But older students, they're studying history and worldviews and science and all the things. They can consider how to use it, how to connect it, how to think through it. Um, but you're pondering and
Yeah.
marinating that within yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So seek wisdom and understanding, as James chapter 1 tells us. When we
Yes,
ask for wisdom, he will give it.
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
I think we forget to do that sometimes too. I think we just kind of get into our groove and into our day, and we forget to ask the Lord to help us to learn the things that He wants
Yeah,
us to learn, because everything we learn really should be learned for the purpose of drawing us closer to Him and helping us to understand His creation and His character and who He
right.
is better, right? It's not
Yes.
just for the sake of learning it so we can regurgitate facts
Absolutely
and
not. There's a prayer that I really like written by, I think, St. Thomas Aquinas, who lived long, long, long ago in the 13th century. And his prayer is, to the creator of the universe, shed the light of your wisdom into the darkness of my mind. Fill my thoughts with loving knowledge of you,
hmm,
that I may bring your light to others. Just as you can make even babies speak your truth, instruct my tongue and guide my pen to convey the wonderful glory of the gospel.
oh, I
And
love
that's
that. Yeah.
just part of it, but that has always been something that I try to look at the beginning of each day so that I am in the right mindset to communicate
Yeah,
with
yeah, I
others.
love that, and I love that he talks about sharing the light with others, because it's really what we're to do, and that's the Great
Mhm.
Commission. We
Yes,
learn about God, we learn who He is. Everything we teach our kids, we should be directing them towards Him so that they can go out into His kingdom and share the good news of Jesus with
yes,
others. But if we don't
absolutely.
know Him or understand Him, it's hard to do that.
Mhm. And
So,
so it's just this step surprised me and, these rules of study for his college students, and yet this is like the penultimate step, or the
Right.
ultimate step really, because he what he added right after it, that was the original 6, and then he added right after it one more thing. Go
Okay.
outside and think as you walk by the river,
Mhm.
and you play, or as you're outside, just go outside and be in creation and ponder.
So that's step 7.
Yes.
Okay. Go outside, enjoy God's creation. Imagine the simplicity of that.
Yes, and that's what I love about going back in history and
Yeah.
discovering how people learned, what was effective, because what was effective then and created the minds that we've talked about, like the founding fathers or Leonardo da Vinci or others. They're doing these things. They're
Yep.
not doing multiple choice, fill in the blank worksheets.
Right.
These are the things they did.
Yeah,
If you look at
absolutely.
Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, that's a learning journal.
Wow.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So cool. And again, this goes back to, the beginning. They didn't have all the distractions that we have today.
Not at all.
Nowadays it seems like, most kids, and we have done a couple of podcasts recently on just digital distractions and things like that. And the hours that kids spend on their tablets and their phones and watching TV and all of the
Stunning.
things that they're to distract them. Imagine all the stuff that they're missing out on.
Yes, it's life that they're missing,
Right.
and
Right.
that's
It
so
is.
tragic.
It is so tragic. Okay. We have a few minutes left for this episode, but I want to talk about one last thing really quickly. You talk about the importance of teaching penmanship, and
Yes.
you talk a little bit about the science behind that and how it develops the brain and all of the things, all of the benefits of teaching penmanship. Talk about that for a minute.
Okay, there have been a bunch of studies done since, keyboards have proliferated, and the arguments about, do we have to teach penmanship now? Everybody's got a keyboard. You don't need to.
Right.
And what they found is that kids retain more when they write, because what they're doing when you take notes in a class, for example, you're summarizing.
Yeah.
You're performing a physical action, whereas even a college student, say, who could sit in a classroom and transcribe word for word what a professor's saying, there's no mental activity. It's going in one ear and out the other, and basically all they're doing is you can mindlessly transcribe,
Right.
but you're not engaging your mind in order to summarize, in order to retain, because choices have to be made when you're writing by hand. But plus, there's a great deal of history, literary literacy, historic, um, creative, intellectual history that is done in longhand. And the whole process of writing in longhand, as my grandmother used to say, does help you remember and
And
retain.
when you say longhand, you're talking about cursive.
It's cursive, but even putting pen to paper in print, I write my personal style is more of a cursive italic,
Okay.
just for my everyday writing, but I will switch it up and do what seems to fit with the text that I'm writing, because a lot of times I use it as part of my prayer life,
Okay.
copying a biblical text or, um, other things,
Yeah.
because it is a very meditative practice.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's communication. So learning penmanship and learning it so that it's easy
Mhm.
and not physically hard and painful and distracting to the child helps them communicate better ultimately.
So how do we teach penmanship? Obviously, when our kids are in kindergarten, we teach them, how to write their ABCs. And so they typically know how to form the letters. And until they get into the upper grades, usually they write by hand. But is just writing it by hand enough, or do we want them to be able to use italics or cursive writing or something that engages the brain even more? Because I know that there's lots of studies that go along with cursive writing and things like that.
Yes, and it is a beautiful skill to learn because it does tend to engage the brain. It connects because the letters are connected.
Mhm.
Your whole thought process becomes smoother and more connected.
Right.
Um, and there's satisfaction for a lot of kids in seeing something that is forming beautifully. And if you think back 100 years, my grandparents did not learn to print ever. They were not taught to print in school. It was you started with cursive and that's what you wrote because anybody could pick up printing.
Right.
And as someone who taught calligraphy for a number of years, I think it's super important to have your children understand how to sit properly and hold the
Mhm.
pen properly and help themselves so that the physical part of writing is not a distraction.
Right.
Because if it's painful, it's not going to be practiced.
Right. So, how do you teach that? If we have a student who's maybe in middle school or high school and they don't have great penmanship and they don't sit properly and they don't hold the pencil properly, how do you reteach that skill? Because I mean, that's a skill that, I mean, I would say probably by the time a child is, 5 or 6, at least, if not younger, they hold their pencil or their crayon or whatever their writing utensil is the way that is most comfortable for them, even though it's not the proper way to do it. So, how do you reteach that
Hopefully, you'll have a chance to teach it correctly at the
the
very
first time?
first.
Sure.
Yeah, that is ideal because if you get a good curriculum, such as, say, cursive logic curriculum, it's
Mhm.
somewhat that has been, within the last few years developed. It teaches um, penmanship by letter families, shape
Okay.
families. And so it helps, but each page reminds the student how to hold the pen and how to sit with their arms supported, posture straight, and it makes such
Okay.
a difference in the penmanship. But try to teach it correctly first.
Sure.
And if they have learned a bad pen grip, try to wean them through a series of, depending on the age of the child,
Mhm.
stars and stickers,
Yeah.
or if it's an older student, particularly someone who has an eye for beauty, wean them with a calligraphy instruction book, how
Mm,
to learn calligraphy,
okay.
because you have to sit well and you have to hold your pen well in order to do beautiful calligraphy, and it's doable.
Yeah, okay. And you said it's called Cursive Logic Curriculum?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll put a link to that. I'm going to look that up and put a link to that in the show notes as well. So we're out of time for this episode. We're going to come back tomorrow, and tomorrow we are going to talk about teaching teens. That's a whole nother topic, and this is one that I know that in our world today, there are a lot of people who have taken their kids out of school in middle school and high school, and that's a really scary thing. Because you've not been teaching your kids since they were in kindergarten. You're just now jumping into this homeschool thing. And so we're going to focus specifically on how to bring your teenager home and teach them, or how to teach them if you've had them home the whole time, because it really is a whole different world of teaching. So thank you, Janice, so much for joining me again today. People can find out more about you at everydayeducation.com.
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Sounds great. We'll put those links in the show notes as well. Thank you guys for joining us. Please be sure to share this with your friends and leave a review on iTunes. We greatly appreciate that. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Bye.